Live report.
What number is it, David?
Number 10.
Number 10. Just give me a few seconds of Atmos first.
I'm Matthew Parris. Welcome to the second part of my search for the truth about television. This week, it's brought me and my producer to a busy South London street. You can hear the Atmos he wanted running under me now. In a minute, Sir David Attenborough will come cheerfully clean about wildlife documentaries. But right now, or at least a few weeks ago when this was recorded, I'm about to meet one of the more unusual characters made famous by television last year.
Hello?
Hello, is that Ray Brown?
It is, it's Ray speaking.
It's Matthew Parris here, Ray.
Hi there, how are you?
Okay,
We'll make our way down just now. I'll see you in a second.
Ray Brown was the star of the BBC One series, The Clampers. It was watched by 8 million viewers. Ray tells me the team from the BBC scoured 16 London boroughs before deciding he was their man. You've been described as a warbling homosexual with attitude who hummed Another One Bites the Dust while he brought misery to drivers in South London. Is that a fair description of you, do you think?
Warbling? Homosexual. Second part of that's definitely true, but the first part...
You don't warble.
Yeah, I don't think I warble anyway. I'd like to think that I sing very well. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a wonderful feeling. I'm going to clamp all day.
Did you feel in any way that you were sort of auditioning for the job?
Oh, yes. My mind was ticking straight away. You know, this is your chance. You use this to your advantage.
So that if they'd wanted someone to perform, they wouldn't have needed to tell you to perform. You already knew what was required.
I think it would have been like giving monkey nuts to a monkey. I would have jumped for them.
I didn't see it as a documentary into the real life of a typical clamper. It looked like an introduction to quite an exotic individual.
So what you're saying is we should have called it Ray's Show?
Yes.
Rather than The Clampers? That's what you're trying to say? I don't think so, no. I still think the realistic side of being a clamper and being a parking attendant was there.
How are you supposed to earn a bleeding living in this country, eh?
There's no point in shouting at me. I never asked you to park here, yeah? I'm simply trying to help you. If you don't want me... You know, yes, it may have followed me as the main character, but there were also 3 or 4 other characters from other boroughs that were in the programme as well.
Yeah, but you left them in the dust, didn't you, Ray?
That's something that was out of my hands, you know. That's not my responsibility.
Ray has left the on-street clamping community now to take up a job with his company's head office, while his newly appointed agent seeks more television work for him. In The Clampers, Ray may have camped it up for the cameras, but at least the exotic creature was filmed in the wild. But was this one?
The northern lights play in the winter sky, whilst below in the mountains, and by now well covered by a deep layer of snow, this pregnant female settles down for the next 4 months.
The wildlife special on the polar bear was broadcast in November '97. Amazing shots of these animals in the Arctic wastes culminated in a mother bedding down to give birth to a tiny cub under the snow. In the Arctic? No, it was in a Belgian zoo. Sir David Attenborough explains.
There was a possibility of filming the birth of a polar bear actually in her ice den beneath the snow up in the Arctic. But it might well have disturbed the mother polar bear to such a degree that she might have eaten her young. It seems to me perfectly acceptable to film that birth in captivity. Now, you don't make a secret of it, and indeed we said perfectly clearly in some of the supporting publicity that this shot was taken in that way. But suddenly to have what I think personally was a very moving and magical scene in which you saw the polar bear making her den, and you finally saw the birth. To intrude into that with a sentence which says, but this of course was taken in a particular zoo, would be to destroy the whole emotional impact of that sequence. Her cub is born helpless and blind after only 60 days in the womb. Deep under the protective covering of snow and tucked into its mother's thick fur, the cub stays warm, despite the appalling conditions of winter outside, where temperatures drop to below minus 50 degrees.
Do you think the audience failed to realise where the birth was taking place?
Oh, I hope so, because what one wishes to do is to suspend questioning in that kind of sense and to try and really convey the reality of the situation. And the important thing, the emotional thing, was the birth of the polar bear, not where it was taking place.
One understands, applauds Sir David's concern for animals. But I'm worried too about the effect on humans. I was staggered to learn how often scenes from wildlife documentaries aren't what they seem. In one film, the crunch of reindeer feet on fresh snow was recreated with a tray of custard powder because the microphones couldn't get close enough in the wild. That's harmless, but this is sinister.
I can think of a film in which there was an attack on an animal. I knew, this was shot by someone from Europe, I knew from the behavior of the buffalo that that animal was not acting normally, and I subsequently discovered that my hunch was correct, that the animal had actually been given an injection, so it was half drugged, and it didn't run away when it was attacked. And we refused to show that.
So far, much of this has been, if revealing, anecdotal. So let's focus on one programme in a bit more detail. Living with the Enemy was last year's ratings triumph for the BBC's Community Programmes unit. It showed us what happens when people who hate each other are forced to live together for a week.
There's loads of swearing now on BBC Two, as for them, the post-match shower takes on a whole new meaning, living with the enemy.
In this episode, 2 homophobic rugby players from Castleford near Leeds went to stay with a gay couple in Soho. Each of them received £750 as compensation for loss of wages. The gay couple, Paul and Mark, saw an advert in the pink paper placed by the programme's producers. "Are you hard enough?" it asked. Paul and Mark thought they were, and sat down with the production team to plan activities for their hard-arsed rugby-playing invitees. Paul and Mark say that from the start, the producers had ideas as to what might make a good week's filming, depicting all sides of gay life, suggesting they take their unsympathetic guests round an AIDS hospice, and more.
And they wanted us to go to a porn cinema in Soho, and we said, well, we actually don't go to porn cinemas. And then they asked us if we wanted to go and talk to a gay counselling group, and we're going, well, we don't need counselling. We're actually quite happy being gay and being a couple, and I don't want to be portrayed as some victim who needs counselling after going to porn cinemas and seeing all my friends dying of AIDS.
There was certainly some healthy and robust negotiations about what should take part in the half hour. We didn't at any stage ask Paul and Mark to do anything they didn't want to do.
That's Debbie Christie, the executive producer of Living with the Enemy.
We threw in a lot of ideas, they threw in a lot of ideas. We agreed an agenda. That is rather unusual for documentary making, and we did indeed stick to that agenda.
We were doing the things we normally did, and the director said, this is boring. This is boring, we've got to do something else. And so, basically, at the end of the day, what you saw, we took them to places and did things with them that inflamed them.
The allegation that Mick and Wayne, the 2 rugby lads, were taken to places that would deliberately inflame them is categorically denied by Debbie Christie. She says no attempt was made to stifle reconciliation between the 2 camps, and that Paul and Mark, the gay couple, saw and were happy with a rough cut of the film.
Welcome to the stage, the entire company of Madame JoJo's Showtime.
One of the places on the agreed agenda that week was Madame JoJo's, the Soho cabaret club where corporate London comes to be waited on by leggy drag queens. The utterly OTT Ruby Venezuela entertains from the stage, often wearing a basket of fruit on her head.
Your life is going crazy and you don't know what to do. Your business is red under and you're coming down with blue.
Ruby wasn't on that night as Paul, Mark, Mick and Wayne took their seats in the royal box. The cameras were trained on them and on the stage as other performers sashayed into the spotlight.
And they targeted the rugby players. Indeed, one of the drag queens tried to get one of them up into a pink tutu and to sing You're the One That I Want from Greece. With really...
She was trying to get them on stage, and they're going no, and they were going red, and they were absolutely furious to the point where they would have literally punched somebody.
Also watching this uncomfortable spectacle was Eugenie Tam, the PR manager for Madame JoJo's, who'd agreed to allow the cameras in that night. She was upset with her performers.
So I went backstage immediately, and I said, what the heck was that all about? To which their immediate response was, we were asked to do it. I said, what do you mean you were asked to do it? They said, we were asked by a man from the BBC. They said, look, we're filming this documentary. They're getting on rather too well. Can we create some friction in the whole proceedings?
The executive producer of the programme, Debbie Christie, was down there herself that night.
We went to Madame JoJo's at Paul and Mark's suggestion. We explained to the drag queens why we were there. What we didn't anticipate was that they would then use that to target and ridicule Mick and Wayne. I understand why they did. It got a cheap laugh, but it wasn't appropriate to put that in the programme.
There's a conflict of witnesses here in that the PR person from Madame Jojo says that a member of the BBC's production team actually went backstage and suggested to the drag queens that they target the rugby players.
That's not true.
The footage from Madame Jojo's didn't make it into the programme, but there were scenes from another club, Heaven, the gay disco. The Leeds boys didn't stay long, put off by the outrageously dressed people they, and we the viewers, saw in the queue.
I've only lasted 10 minutes in there. It's really done me head in, rubbing shoulders. There's some right faggots, dressed up like, I don't know, Liberace.
It seems likely the queue of exotically dressed clubbers that so offended Mick and Wayne was sought out and placed there by staff in the club. After the departure of the two rugby players, viewers saw Paul and Mark enjoy themselves regardless with a night of dancing. But actually, these shots were taken 2 weeks later.
We had to refilm a bit at Heaven. We had to collect together the same people, put on the same clothes. We had to look at the film because we couldn't remember what we...
Who asked you to do this?
The BBC.
Well, what was their explanation?
Well, the film that they had got didn't come out very good. Could we go back, do it again? So we went back to Heaven.
And pretend that this was a continuation.
Of... I mean, if you look very carefully, my hair's about an inch shorter.
They had it cut during the week.
During the week.
So
I'm stood in the shadows.
So basically, the BBC constructed them rushing out and us going, oh, what the hell, let's stay and have a good time, which didn't happen. We actually came back to our flat because we're worried about what they were going to do and what they were going to do to us when they came back in a drunken state, and it being their last night. And that was true, and that would have made a lot better television. But no, they had to pretend that we didn't care, and we actually went out to dance. We were worried. We were worried.
Mick and Wayne got to Heaven, went into the bar, got as far as the bar, took a look, didn't like it, left, stood outside, made it very, very clear that they did not like what they had seen, and for them it had been some sort of final straw, that what they had seen they had found so emotionally disturbing.
Of course, one of the reasons they didn't like what they'd seen was that they saw in the queue waiting to get into Heaven a whole group of outrageously dressed people who I understand were not part of that queue but had been gathered beforehand and placed in the queue for the filming.
They were not gathered and placed by us. We had nothing to do with that. What happened was, what the programme maker was left with was a very important moment in which what we did not have were the shots of Heaven to show the audience, many of whom will not been to Heaven, what Heaven is like. So what we did, which was perfectly proper, was we explained the dilemma to Paul and Mark. We said, look, we have this scene, this situation. We don't have shots of Heaven. We want to make this sequence work. Would you be prepared to go back to Heaven another time so that we have sufficient shots, what we would call repeat shots, to make the sequence work?
Yes.
Paul and Mark were perfectly happy with it, did it, got the shots, put them there.
But the shots don't explain the sequence, they distort the sequence. Paul and Mark didn't dance at Heaven because they were upset by the whole week. The departure of the rugby players wasn't followed by an evening's dancing and celebration at Heaven. The programme suggests that it was.
The shots that we use at Heaven are of a number of people dancing at Heaven. What we were doing was getting, I think, probably 5 or 6 shots which reflect what Heaven is like on Saturday night. Heaven is not full of miserable people on Saturday night. Heaven is full of people enjoying themselves on Saturday night.
Including, in this case, Paul and Mark.
I think that's the lowest of the low, Mick. Really. And you say you don't like what you say.
Low. You're lowest at low.
You're the lowest.
You're lowest at low.
You are. You are.
You are.
You are.
You are.
You are.
You are.
An uncomfortable week for all appears to culminate with this argument. What triggered it is incidentally never shown, an omission which I think distorts the whole scene.
No, I was going to pack your bag so you could go. No, you're not making an effort. All you're doing is being offensive in our house.
You're not making an effort.
No, you've done nothing.
That's Mark, you can hear, arguing with the Leeds lads. His boyfriend Paul kept out of it, and we cut to Paul in the bedroom, cowering from the fracas in the living room. But I gather that this scene was slotted into the argument. It was taken earlier that week, not during the argument, but when Paul was sitting on the bed, waiting for Mark to come out of the bathroom.
You're absolutely right. Those shots were taken at a different time. I don't think that they in any way distort what was happening. Paul was in the flat, didn't want to get involved in that argument, and that's what those shots were doing. They were saying, they were representing, giving you a feel for what was happening.
So what you're saying is Paul might very well have been sitting with his head bowed on the bed. So even though he wasn't, or we don't know whether he was, we're going to get another picture of him sitting with his head bowed on his bed on another occasion in other circumstances, and use it to illustrate how Paul might have been feeling at that moment.
I'm saying that those were, again, what I think we would call repeat shots. That is the spirit of what was happening. Paul knew that was the spirit of what was happening. Paul saw the programme.
Yes.
Paul accepted that that was a pretty good representation of how that argument panned out.
And so we get to the nub of it. The nub of what we've been talking about for much of this series. Notice what Debbie Christie has just said. These pictures, she says, portray the spirit of what was happening. But of course, television pictures don't just portray the spirit of anything. They portray real events, or purport to. That was not Paul in his bedroom during the argument. Whatever he was doing during the argument was not shown. Making these programmes over the past few weeks, speaking to TV professionals, I've detected a subtle remapping of the moral hinterland. Certain words and phrases keep recurring. Inner truth, verity, the spirit of the thing, the essential reality, anything but those awkwardly hard-edged little words, true, real. Let go of true and real and fumble instead for the inner truth and essential reality, and a whole world of camera possibilities and watchable television opens up to you. If your purpose is honest, if you are essentially an honest person, you feel justified in employing less than honest means to put your inner truths, your verity, across. There are other ways of making documentaries.
Hi, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm doing this film about Kurt Cobain, and I heard that he used to fire his rifle at this building.
I'm sorry, sir, but you're not allowed to come in. You'll have to call security. Are you authorized to be in the building with a camera?
No, but it's just a little question. Good grief.
Do you want to shut the camera off, please?
That's a scene from Kurt and Courtney, a documentary about the death of Kurt Cobain, the lead singer of the rock group Nirvana. The film's director, Nick Broomfield, has blundered unannounced into the reception of the Washington State Lottery. TV viewers can see the sound equipment. We're aware of the camera. This failure to hide the mechanics reminds us we're just watching a film. Nick Broomfield thinks factual television makers in this country tend to over-research, to set things up in advance, then head into the production process with a kind of tunnel vision.
You know, British documentary television has been dominated by journalists. And journalists are, you know, often not very literate in the grammar of film. And they base their programs on, you know, intellectual argument and the word, and they don't use images properly, and sometimes when they use images, they use them in a way that is very manipulative because they want to make a point.
The former war correspondent, Martin Bell, now an MP, agrees.
The pictures you show have to be real, the soundtrack has to go with them, and the facts have to be accurate. And if you're backing off from that, you're getting into docudrama, you're going down all kinds of dangerous roads.
On the whole, do you think that editors, those back at home in charge, want to know if corners have been cut, or rather not?
Mostly they would rather not know, because the knowledge is dangerous, and they have a natural tendency to stay loyal to their staff.
I asked one such television boss, Greg Dyke, if that was true. Greg is now head of the TV giant Pearson Television and chairman of Channel 5.
After I'd been chief executive of London Weekend, I went out on the road and made 12 half hours over 2 years for Channel 4 on sport, which included the famous Will Carling 57 old farts quote and all that sort of stuff. What fascinated me about going back on the road was you discover it's as farcical as it ever was, but it's still incredibly difficult. I remember, you turn up to interview a bench jockey who doesn't turn up. Well, why doesn't he turn up? Well, he's a bench jockey. I mean, he's not likely to turn up very often. And all those sorts of things come back to you when you go back on the road. And there is always a temptation, therefore, to cut the corners. And if you're a television executive at a fairly senior level, it's very difficult to know.
Your bench jockey doesn't turn up. What can an unscrupulous producer do?
Well, you interview somebody who isn't a jockey back of camera or face blotted out, and they say the lines you want them to say. And I can't, in all honesty, say I don't think that's happened in British television, because I know it has.
So what's the answer? I spoke to Alan Yentob, the BBC's Director of Television.
There are lessons to be learned, absolutely, but I don't think the rule book can simply be black and white, because, you know, capturing reality on film is quite a complicated business, and maybe we need to be tougher about some of the things that we allow people to do without identifying what they've done.
And now a moment of formality, but it's worth listening to the exact words. The BBC's new guidelines say this: it's not legitimate to stage or restage action which is significant to the development of the action or narrative without clearly signalling this to the audience. The guidelines also state that shots and sequences should never be intercut to suggest that they were happening at the same time if the resulting juxtaposition of material leads to a distorted and misleading impression of events. But this leaves a lot of leeway. Of every example we've looked at in this series, TV professionals have argued that the fakery was incidental rather than central. Yet, in every case, the fakery has made us viewers believe that we'd seen reality when we hadn't. Alan Yentob believes, as a man in his position must, that a line can be held. I disagree. I don't think it's possible to separate honest from dishonest television. Making this series, talking to TV people over the past few weeks, I found the professional instinct is to close ranks. Protest everything is fine as far as you dare, but where it's patently not, demonize an offending producer as just a rogue. But the reality, as I think we've just seen, is not of good guys and bad guys, but of a blurred and tangled picture, shading from the obviously illegitimate through the probably okay to the harmless artifice. Factual television making is in a state of serious moral confusion, and the problem is not the people, it's the medium. Life isn't good television. To make good television, it's essential to contrive and manipulate moving images. The only danger is that viewers might actually believe it. So why don't we just let go? Why don't we drop the pretense of worthiness, the unequal struggle to see this as a trustworthy medium, and admit that television, all television, is entertaining nonsense? Not that I should preach. I couldn't have made this program without all the tricks that radio invented and TV took over. Because real life just isn't as slick as it sounds on air.
Regrets, I've had a few.
What number is it, David?
Number 10.
Number 10. Wrong one.
I'll state my case.
I'm a hopeless interviewer, as you'll know if you've ever watched Weekend World, so there'll be long pauses while I read my notes.
Good, I'll read mine too.
Big mistake number 3, yeah.
Can you do that again? So you said Birmingham, I think it was Liverpool.
Start again, yeah.
Big mistake number 3, yeah.
My friend Paul kept out of it.
Sorry, Matt, can I just ask you to do that again?
I think that's all right, isn't it? Yeah. I'm Matthew Parris. Making me say it again was my producer, David Prosser. Parris on TV was an all-out production for 5 Live.